الشيطان الرجيم وإذ قلنا ادخلوا هذه القرية فكلوا منها حيث شئتم رغدا وادخلوا الباب سجدا وقولوا حطة نغفر لكم خطاياكم وسنزيد المحسنين. صدق الله العلي العظيم. حطوا وفاءكم بذكر الصلاة على محمد وآل محمد.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
Dear brothers, elders, brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. First, like to congratulate you all and congratulate the Imam of our time, Ajalallahu Ta'ala Farajahu Sharif, on this beautiful occasion of the birth anniversary of our 8th Imam, Imam Ridha alayhi salam. Imam Ridha alayhi salam was born in Medina on the 11th of Dhul-Qa'dah, and Imam Ridha was one of 37 of the children of Imam al-Kadhim alayhi salam. Imam al-Kadhim alayhi salam was blessed with 37 children, as the narrations say, and this is truly a blessing, especially when you look at the fact that the majority of the life of Imam al-Kadhim, or a big chunk of his life, was spent in prison, from jail cell to jail cell, from dungeon to dungeon, and even with this, he still managed, with the blessings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to have 37 children and continue his progeny. So Imam Ridha alayhi salam, during the time of Imam al-Kadhim, he was in Medina while Imam al-Kadhim was in prison. Imam Ridha became the Imam at the age of 35, as the narrations say, and before that he was spending his life in Medina teaching the lessons of the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam. He would have classes, he would have lessons, and he would preach the message of Abu Abdullah Hussein and the rest of the Ahlul Bayt in those gatherings. And so Imam Ridha, the narrations say, he would sit and bring out books and bring out narrations, and he'd identify which ones are authentic, which ones are fabricated, and which ones we can take from the lessons of Rasulullah and the Ahlul Bayt. And among the things he would teach was the importance of cleanliness and the importance of hygiene. And he would also mention to take care of your physical health. So the first lesson, inshallah, that we can learn from the life of Imam Ridha alayhi salam is taking care of your health and hygiene. Inshallah, I begin by reminding myself first, and inshallah, serving you all in my limited knowledge with whatever I can. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. So Imam Ridha alayhi salam would always remind his companions to be clean, to be presentable in any form you can, by cleaning your teeth, by putting on cologne, perfume, and always being presentable in your environment as well, not just in your physical appearance. Imam Ridha also was a very knowledgeable, one of the most, all of them are knowledgeable, but he had the knowledge of medicine as well, and it shows in what's known as the Golden Book. So the Golden Book is a book written by the Imam in the time of Al-Ma'mun, who was the Khalifa, and we'll talk about Al-Ma'mun and how he became a Khalifa and how Imam Ridha ended up in Khurasan and Mashhad. But Al-Ma'mun asked Imam Ridha alayhi salam, he told him multiple times, I would like you to tell me the best way that I could take care of myself. He repeatedly asked him to give him advice on how to take care of his physical health and nutrition and so on and so forth. So Imam Ridha prepared a book, he prepared an entire dissertation, and he presented it to the Ma'mun. And when he did so, the Ma'mun was astonished. He had never seen such writing in medical practice before, and so he presented it to the medical professionals of the time, and they were all astonished. They were all very shocked in the way the explicit detail that the Imam goes into about the human body, the anatomy, the physiology, and they were all surprised. So the Ma'mun ordered for this book to be written in gold. He ordered for the book to be written in golden ink, and that's why the name of the book is known now as the Golden Book, or the Golden Dissertation of Medicine from Imam Ridha alayhi salam. So I took a segment of the book, and I'm going to quote it directly here. It says, he mentions that if you would like to avoid having an upset stomach, don't drink water between meals, as that shocks your digestive system and does not allow your veins to absorb the nutrients from the food you eat and causes pain in your stomach. So inshallah we'll analyze this very shortly. I did a quick Google search, and Google tells you immediately that this is just a myth, and that this practice is old practice and something that has based on no true solidified evidence. So what it is the Imam is basically saying that to avoid having an upset stomach, when you're eating, do not drink water at the same time. You should have some gap in between the time when you eat and the time when you drink water. And so I tried to dive a little deeper into the research, and unfortunately there isn't much research on this topic. There was a paper that I read that had similar like explanation. Don't drink water, have a 30 to 40 minute gap between the food you eat. But even that didn't have proper evidence that you could use and rely on, and it was very limited research. So from my understanding, I truly believe that eventually with the advancements of research and technology and further data that's presented to us, the research will corroborate with the message of the Imam. As we've seen in the past, where the Ahlul Bayt's teachings and the Quran's teachings eventually is corroborated with science later on in life. And so it's something that we could use now in our day-to-day life until eventually we get the proper evidence from the science as well. So the Imam also has a certain a chapter in the book as well, where he talks about taking care of your physical health, taking care of your diet, and being able to take care of your body, as the body is not our body to own. We don't own our body. This is a gift from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's our obligation to take care of our body and make it as presentable as we can in this world as well. And so we don't usually attribute these teachings to the Ahlul Bayt. We don't really attribute them to the Imams, where in fact this book is one of the first books in the Islamic history about medicine. And so the Imam also has these attributes. The Ahlul Bayt also remind us to take care of ourselves and to take care of our body. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. So during this time, so now let's go back to when Imam al-Kadhim alayhi salam was martyred. Imam al-Ridha alayhi salam became the Imam. So we said he was at the age of 35. And Imam al-Ridha alayhi salam spent most of his life in Medina, most of his imamah in Medina. And during the time there was the Khilafah was being handed off from Harun to, after Harun died, his son Al-Amin was now taking over the Khilafah. So his son became Khalifa after Harun, and he basically set grounds in Mashhad. And so after he became the Khalifa, he announced that his son is going to take over his succession after him. So his brother Al-Ma'mun, who was also the son of Harun, he heard this and he couldn't accept it. He was like, there's no way I'm going to let you do that. It's supposed to come to me. It's going to go through my progeny. You only became the Khalifa because you're older than me. So they began a dispute between the two brothers, until eventually Al-Ma'mun took it to the next level. He went into the palace of Al-Amin, he executed everyone there, and he beheaded his own brother, just to establish the Khilafah. So Al-Ma'mun now is in Khurasan, and he began his journey to become the Khalifa and to gain reputation from everyone else. So he made a very tactical decision, which was to call upon Imam al-Ridha alayhi salam from Medina. He summoned him to come to Khurasan and become his secretary. So Imam al-Ridha alayhi salam was at the time in the comfort of his family. He was spending it with his family beside Rasulullah, beside the grave of Rasulullah, and he was teaching the message of Ahlul Bayt, and he was summoned by Al-Ma'mun to go to Khurasan and make that journey. Now the journey might not seem too far from now in today's day, but back then it was a very long journey for them. There was no cars and planes that they could take, so the journey was a very long journey. So Imam al-Ridha alayhi salam had no choice. He had to accept the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and he had to make his way to Khurasan. So that's the second lesson, inshallah, we can learn from Imam al-Ridha alayhi salam. And it's that Imam al-Ridha alayhi salam was always accepting of the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He was constantly submitting to what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had destined for him. Imam is known as الراضي بقضاء الله. He is the one who accepts the will and the destiny of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So Imam Ridha alayhi salam entered into Khurasan. He made his way to the palace of Al-Ma'mun, and Al-Ma'mun announced he basically coerced Imam Ridha alayhi salam to become his secretary. And so Imam Ridha basically had no choice. He didn't want to take that position, but he was forced into that position. He threatened his life if he didn't. And so he took that political position and he got backlash for it. Imam Ridha alayhi salam got a lot of backlash because he was one of the only Imams after Imam Ali alayhi salam to have political power after the Ahlul Bayt. And so they were the people of the time, they were shocked. They were like, how are you taking a political position to Al-Ma'mun, who is known to be not someone who preaches? He was not, if you're the Imam, you should be the leader, and you shouldn't be in a position like this. But the Imam had vision, and he also, like we said, accepted and submitted to the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So nowadays, this topic, let's try to analyze the topic of submission in a more social context. Unfortunately, nowadays, this word itself has a negative connotation to it. We kind of attribute it to weakness. You know, if you claim to submit, that word alone is a sign of weakness, and accepting the fate is weakness nowadays. Where in fact we are commanded by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to submit to Him 5 times a day. In our daily prayers, we are told to submit to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's an obligation for us to be in the position of prayer for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and in the prostration of Allah to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so basically, I watched a video in which there was an analogy that caught my interest. So it was a YouTube video by Better Ideas, and so he basically he gives motivational talks, and he was giving an analogy that had to do with this topic. He said, imagine yourself, you're standing on the edge of a cliff. You're prepared to dive into the water. You can swim, you're able to swim, you made sure that the height is a safe height, there's no obstacles in your way, and you're going to dive into the water. And so he says you're standing there, but you're frozen. You get that feeling of you're unable to push yourself to that next step. You can't push through and actually jump into the water. And so the question is, what is it exactly that's pushing you? What is it that's getting you through and allowing you to jump into the water? So the answer to that is submitting. The answer is you're going to accept the fact that you're going to do it eventually, so you have to basically shut off. You have to basically quiet the thoughts that are in your head in order to be able to take that next step. And so this is a lesson that we can learn in our daily life. If you're in a position where there's an obstacle in front of you, and you're unable to push through that step, a lot of the times you get these thoughts, these unnecessary thoughts that come and tell you that hold you back. And so among these thoughts are like, for example, one thing that you have to be able to fight against is comfort. Comfort itself is something that holds someone back from pushing it to the next step, from getting past their next, to getting to the next stage. And as well as comfort, there's also pre-existing knowledge that you have. If you have knowledge on a certain something, and you experience new knowledge that comes to you and something different from what you already know, it's also that pre-existing knowledge is going to hold you back from believing in that and from accepting it. And so we have to make sure we say no to ourselves and to stop our thoughts from allowing us to take over. What happened is we have examples of this in the Quran, in which Rasulullah, when he would bring his message down to the pagans of the time, they would reject him. And he would say, what is it that you're rejecting? Is it me that you're rejecting? Is there a flaw in the message? Why is it that you're not accepting the belief? And so the answer that they would give is, they would say, بَلْ نَتَّبِعُ مَا وَجَدْنَا عَلَيْهِ آبَاءَنَا. It's what we witnessed, and we're following what our grandfathers did and our forefathers, what they believed in. It's their message that we're following. What you're presenting to us is new. It's not something we've seen before. And so eventually, the Quran also mentions about these people. It says, وَإِن يَرَوْا كُلَّ آيَةٍ لَا يُؤْمِنُوا بِهَا. Even if they were to see every ayah, they wouldn't believe. Even if they were to see every miracle there was, they still wouldn't believe. Because they reached the point, they put themselves in a position in which they were unable to truly believe because of their pre-existing thoughts and pre-existing, knowledge that they had. And so it was basically they closed their hearts and they weren't allowing the truth they weren't allowing themselves to accept this truth. And unfortunately, Rasulullah was the truth himself. He was the biggest miracle of the time, and he was in front of them, he was with them, and he was preaching his message, and they still wouldn't believe the message of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. On the topic of accepting the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, there's a story in which one day Imam Ridha alayhi salam was in Medina, and Harun ordered for the house of Imam al-Kadhim to be looted. Harun was the Khalifa at the time, and Imam Ridha was in the house of his father, Imam al-Kadhim. And so an army was sent to come and loot the house of Imam al-Kadhim alayhi salam. So Imam Ridha alayhi salam was in the house, and when he saw this army approaching, he asked what's going on. He said, we have orders to take all the loot in your house, to take all the jewelry, to take all the gold, to take all the garments, everything that you possess that has value, we have to take it from you. So the Imam, with his vision, instead of fighting back and stopping them from going in and attacking the house with women and children in the house, he went himself and he collected all the valuable items and he gave it to them. He made sure that the woman had they took off their gold, they took off their values, and everything that they had was eventually given to the Khalifa because of such order. And so someone might call this weak. Someone might say, why is the Imam giving up? Why isn't he standing up? Why isn't he putting his foot down and fighting back? And so in reality, the answer is not always to fight back. There has to be vision, there has to be an ability to understand that for the sanctity of your family, for the sanctity of the woman and the children, you have to protect the house. And so you can't fight back. You might not have had the strength and the group to be able to stand up for them. And so eventually, to continue on with the story, eventually as Imam Ridha gained that position as a secretary in Al-Ma'mun's palace, the commanders had to come now and pledge allegiance to him. So the commander of the army who attacked the house of Imam al-Kadhim alayhi salam was one of the people who had to come and give allegiance to Imam Ridha alayhi salam because he was now secretary. So when he walked in, first of all, Al-Ma'mun knew of him being the commander and of the fact that he always, attacked the house of Imam Ridha and what he did to Imam Ridha alayhi salam. The Ma'mun already knew of this. So when this commander walked in, Imam Ridha alayhi salam looked at Al-Ma'mun and he whispered in his ear. He told him something. So this man, he saw this. As soon as he saw this, right away, he's like, I swear to you by your father, do not listen to what the man's telling you. Do not listen to what Imam Ridha is telling you. So Al-Ma'mun said, you're telling me not to listen to what he's telling me. And he whispered in my ear right now, he said, by my right upon you, do not punish this man. Let him go. So I'm going to listen to you and I'm going to punish you. And he eventually got his fate. So with this, the mercy of Imam Ridha alayhi salam, he was telling the Ma'mun to forgive him, and eventually the man got his fate in the end. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. So inshallah, that's the second thing we can learn from the life of Imam Ridha alayhi salam, and it is to accept the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. As we know, Imam Ridha had to make that journey from Medina to Khurasan. And in this journey, it was a difficult journey, it was a long journey. But the narrations say that Imam Ridha alayhi salam was always in a state of worship. He was always worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And he also was the first to begin the tradition of the 10 nights of Majalis of Muharram. So that's the third lesson that we can learn from his life is to uphold the Majalis of Imam Hussein alayhi salam and the gatherings in which the teachings of the Ahlul Bayt are taught. Imam Ridha was the first to begin the Majalis, the first 10 nights of Muharram, where he held a majlis every night on his journey to Khurasan, and he began this tradition. Imam Ridha also says, there's a hadith in which it's narrated, he says, Rahimallahu abdan ahya amrana. May Allah have mercy on the man, on the servant who revives our teachings, who revives our message. So they asked him, how do we revive your teachings? How do we revive the message of the Ahlul Bayt? He said, by continuing the majalis by gathering, learning the knowledge of the Ahlul Bayt and distributing that knowledge to the community. And he also says, inshallah, this majlis can be accepted from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He mentions in another hadith, he says, "Man jalisa majlisan yahya fihi amrana lam yamut qalbahu yawma tamutul qulub." He says, whoever sits in a majlis, whoever sits in a gathering in which there is the revival of our message, his heart will not die the day the hearts die. His soul will not die the day the souls die. And so it's our obligation to continue to strive to revive these majalis, to continue the majlis of Abu Abdullah al-Hussein as well as the rest of the Ahlul Bayt, and to learn from their teachings, as they are truly a gem. What I call it is, we have something in which not other schools of faith have with the Imam. We have what I say is a cheat code. They've basically given us a cheat code in which we can follow to find the true path to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in which other schools of faith do not have, and other religions in general, they don't have such guidance that we do. And so there's the first ayah that I mentioned. I said in the beginning of the lecture, it says, "A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajeem, wa qulu hittatun naghfir lakum khatayakum." So it says, ask for forgiveness and we will forgive you. And so Imam Ridha was asked about this verse, and he said, we are the door to your forgiveness. Come through us, seek forgiveness through us, ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by our sake, and inshallah we will ask Allah on your behalf to be forgiven. And so we have the Ahlul Bayt who can be our source of guidance, as well as a connection from us to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so whenever we're in this world, wherever we are, we must maintain these majalis. We must uphold the remembrance of Imam Hussein alayhi salam, no matter where we are. Alhamdulillah, we are very lucky and fortunate to be in Vancouver, in which we are able to uphold these majalis without any problems. We're able to gather and not have any restrictions on us. And there are people outside of Canada who are unable to uphold these majalis, and they still do. There are people who, their faith alone, they're unable to truly believe in their faith without being, prosecuted, getting in trouble, getting put into jail and prison, as we've seen recently. And so I know personally someone who, if his family were to know that he believed and he was a Shia believer of the Ahlul Bayt, they would kick him out of the house. They wouldn't allow him to pray the way he prays. They wouldn't allow him to believe the way he does. So we are very fortunate, and we are in fact spoiled to a certain extent, because we don't experience the hardship that other countries and other people in the world experience. This is a little off topic, but I learned something recently that was very interesting, and it got me thinking. It was the people in Cambodia back in the day. This was around 10 years ago. They were very high in iron deficiency. There was a common disorder going around in which majority of the population was going through iron deficiency. And so iron deficiency is the mineral in our body that we need. Some common, examples of symptoms that happen are, if in a child, if he's unable to get enough iron, it could really affect his mental, ability as he grows up. He could have cognitive dysfunction. And in general, adults as well, it affects it causes fatigue, and it affects, production in general. And so this is a basic necessity that we have that they were unable to achieve. Usually we get it through our meat source, and it was difficult for them to achieve this. So what they discovered to find a solution for this was known as the lucky iron fish. So it's literally an iron rod. They would take an iron rod, and they would put this iron rod into their cooking pots, into their pans, into their food, whatever they cook their food with, so that eventually what happens is the iron from this rod leaks out into the food that they're cooking, and is eventually absorbed in our digestion when you eat the food. And that's the way that they began to achieve their, to end this problem that they had, and they began to, cure the problem of iron deficiency. And so, when have we ever heard of such a thing? When are we ever going to need to take a block of iron to cook our food with in order to, receive our basic nutrition? It's something that's not heard of here. We're constantly spoiled with the food, and if anything, obviously it's a big concern here as well. It's a iron deficiency also exists in Canada and in the West as well. And we have solutions though. We have supplements and we have other ways that we can achieve our iron deficiency and so on, continue to achieve our nutritional growth. Salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. So to conclude on the similar topic of the fact that we are always, spoiled with what we have, there is a story by my grandfather, Ayatollah Sayyid Murtada al-Qazwini. He narrates the story from his father. So he says, I was sitting at home and I saw my father. He was exiting the house to leave to go to the Haram of Imam Hussein alayhi salam. But he was leaving at an unusual time. Normally he leaves during Salah time. He goes either Fajr, Maghrib, Dhuhr, any of the Salah times. But he was leaving when there was no Salah time. It was an unusual time. So I asked him, where are you going? He said, I'm going to go pray. He said, what are you going to pray? There's no Salah right now. He said, I'm going to go pray Salat al-Ju', the prayer of hunger. Because at the time, there was no food to provide for the family. And he was experiencing hunger in the family, and he had no other solution, and he didn't know what to do. So he went to pray a salah in the Haram of Imam Hussein to ask Allah to, allow that, to gift them with food, to bless them with food. Have you ever heard of this salah? I hadn't heard of this until today, until when I heard the story. The salah is not something we've ever needed to learn about, not ever something we've needed to pray in our lives, because it's always there for us. We always have the food we need. There's always, bread on the table. And so we take that for granted, and we don't realize the true blessing that we have of such a thing. And so with that, inshallah, we can learn these 3 lessons from the life of Imam Abdullah alayhi salam. Firstly, cleanliness and hygiene. Second, to submit to the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And third, to continue and to uphold the majalis of Imam Hussein alayhi salam. Inshallah, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept our majlis, and may Allah grant us the ziyarah of Imam Ridha alayhi salam in this world and his shafa'ah in the hereafter.